Hello, my name's Jake. I wanted to talk about the gayest western of all time, Howard Hawks' 1948 Red River, which I watched for the first time last night. I knew a lot about Red River kind of anecdotally, or what I'd heard other people say. I knew it was one of Peter Bogdanovich's favourite westerns. I know he was a big champion of Hawks in general, but particularly loved Red River. I'd sort of half been put off it by the runtime. I'm the sort of person where if something is over 2 hours, can be a little bit slow getting around to it sometimes. I'm a 85-minute to 100-minute person usually. Not always, I'll make exceptions as I did here, but generally if I see something's over 2 hours on the back of the DVD cover or Blu-ray, I will drag my heels a little bit. But I love John Wayne. I was intrigued by Montgomery Clift. Didn't know a lot about him prior to going into this. I've always enjoyed Walter Brennan anytime he pops up in little roles, John Ford films, Howard Hawks films. Didn't know a lot about Joanne Dru. My knowledge of the leading ladies or the actresses of the 1940s isn't great. I know the big people. I didn't know a lot about Joanne Dru. I think I have seen her in other things, but she wasn't a name that jumped off the page. So I'm excited to see her as well. As I mentioned at the start, the film, it's more than just a gay western, but I think to a modern audience, it's hard not to watch it and notice the very obvious subtext, not just between John Wayne and Montgomery Clift, but in a very homoerotic scene between Monty Clift and John Ireland's character of Cherry Valance. But I'll talk about the film kind of more generally. Plot-wise, so John Wayne plays Thomas Dunson. He is a cattle farmer and he spends, originally the plan is a decade, but ends up being 14 years, building the biggest cattle farm in Texas. He has 9,000 cows or cattle by the time we rejoin the story. So we meet him at the beginning, flash forward 14 years later, and he's gone from nothing to running the biggest cattle farm in Texas. But post-Civil War, the finances of Texas are not what they could be or probably were. So Wayne needs to move somewhere else where there's more demand for cattle. So he moves to, or tries to move to, Missouri. So the plan is they're going to ride, I think they say 1,000 miles from Texas to Missouri. When they get to Missouri, they'll sell the cattle for a very, very handsome profit. But this is the 1860s. This is a treacherous path. This is beset with carpetbaggers, beset with Native Americans who aren't called Native Americans in the film, as you can probably imagine. A little bit of political incorrectness, but I suppose you can write that down to it being 1940s. And essentially, the plan is they will travel to Missouri. They will start up again there and make a handsome profit on the ranch, I suppose, or the stockpile of animals that Wayne has collected. As they go, Wayne becomes a little bit of a tyrant. Wayne becomes possibly an alcoholic. You do see him drinking. It's not really foregrounded, but it's there. He becomes an insomniac. He becomes paranoid. He becomes violent. Not really a role, certainly up to that point, what John Wayne had played. And if you listen to people like Peter Bogdanovich, if you listen to some of the things Hawks said himself in archive interviews, Wayne was a little bit unsure about that. Wayne was a little bit uncomfortable about that. He wasn't thrilled about, not thrilled, maybe that's not the right way of saying it, but I think he was nervous about playing a part where he wasn't the good guy. And I think that probably shows up in the film's ending. But getting back to the plot, so Wayne and his adoptive son, played by Montgomery Clift, and their kind of old man tag along. I don't think they're related. It didn't seem to say from what I noticed. And Walter Brennan, they corral a group of men and they start their ride to Missouri. As I said, as they go, things go a little bit off the rails and it eventually leads to a mutiny. I won't spoil the ending, but it builds towards a big kind of final showdown between John Wayne's character and Montgomery Clift's character, which we kind of don't end up getting, but I'll get to that. Things I liked, I think it's Wayne's best performance. I don't think I've seen him, at least of the films I've seen, I don't think I've seen him be better. I think it's a really brave role. I can see why he felt uncomfortable. I can see why he was a bit nervous about it. It subverted that likeable everyman character that we'd seen previously in things like Stagecoach. He takes it further probably later, going into the 50s in The Searchers for John Ford. But this was the first time Wayne really played, if not a bad guy, not a good guy. He is excellent. Once the film starts to turn, it takes about an hour and 20 until he really starts to kind of go into that tyrant mode. For the first section of the film, he's very driven, but not to the point that he eventually gets to, where it's no longer about the cattle anymore almost. It's about winning. It's about being right. It's about finishing what he started. And I think there's admiration in that. Like, you can't help but admire Wayne's desire to achieve what he said he was going to do. But when it comes to shooting deserters, when it comes to putting lives in danger, he clearly goes too far. And there's a scene where he's dressed all in black and he's sitting down and he's like a mad king. It's Shakespearean almost. He's lost it and he's excellent, particularly in that scene, but throughout the film in general. It was Montgomery Clift's first film. Two films came out in the same year. IMDb lists the other film, which I think was called The Search, but that could be wrong, as before. But this was Clift's first film, certainly the first film he shot, if not the first film released. Obviously, prior to that, he was a big actor on Broadway. He's excellent too. He's impossibly handsome. He is suave, he's cool. He apparently had never ridden a horse before. Howard Hawks has said that he had to essentially teach or hire people to teach Montgomery Clift to ride a horse. You can't tell. I've never ridden a horse myself, so maybe I'm not the expert on it, but to an inexperienced eye, he looked really comfortable. He looked really confident. He's excellent in the sense that he doesn't overplay it. Wayne gets the bigger, flashier part. Wayne gets the monologues, the big scenes, the scenery chewing scenes. Clift plays it lower, slower. He doesn't go in for big theatrics, which I think, coming from someone who's from a theatrical background in Clift, that's really admirable. I mean, different styles of acting, obviously. In the theatre, you have to act bigger, you have to project more, you have to act for the person in the back row just as much as you do in the person in the front row. Cinema's different, and I think he clearly got it. I don't know how much of that was down to Clift, how much of that was down to Hawks' direction, but he's excellent. He's really, really good. Walter Brennan's Walter Brennan, and that's not a criticism, that's not a knock on him. He is the funny old man. Hawks does a really great job in all of his films, and especially I think here, of mixing in comedy without taking away the seriousness of the plot. The plot goes to some dark places as the film goes on, and yet I was laughing consistently, and Walter Brennan's character was a big part of that. There's a whole subplot about his son stealing sugar, or I think it's his son. Again, it's not massively clear. And every time it returns to that plot point, it's funny, every time. Until it's not, because there's a stampede, which is phenomenal. I think logistically, to have wrangled so many cattle, for Hawks to have done takes where there's cattle moving in the background. It's not like if someone flubs a line, they can just say, okay, let's go back to top of the scene. To have that many animals in the background and to know that at any point you might have to reset and move everything back to where it was. Really impressive. Not surprising given Hawks' track record and reputation, but still really impressive. And the stampede scene's fantastic. Harry Carey Jr. is in there, as is Harry Carey Sr. But Harry Carey Jr.'s character gets caught up in a stampede and it's phenomenally directed. I don't know how Hawks did some of that. The camera is in the stampede often, and I would love to have known more around how that was shot. It's probably something I will research outside. But then again, do I want to spoil the magic? Because that's, there's no CGI. Those are real cattle, and I would assume charging directly at a camera. Again, I don't know how they did it, but really, really impressive. I mentioned earlier about the gay subtext in the film. I've seen a couple of other people on YouTube talk about this, and I'm glad, because I thought there's no way it's just me. There's no way. The crux of the film is Monty Clift and John Wayne. Theirs is more of a father-son relationship. You can read what you want into that. I think towards the end they make kind of professions of love to each other, not in a romantic way, but I think if you want to make that reading, you can. But I don't see how you can watch the scene with John Ireland and Monty Clift and not think this is a film about homosexuality. They look each other up and down, they size each other up, they take turns looking at each other's guns. At one point, John Ireland actually says something to the effect of, "Oh, well, do you want to look at mine?" And then hands him his gun. I am sorry, there is no way Howard Hawks didn't know that that's a gay scene. And it's fine, it's cool. I think it added something to the film. If anything, I would have liked more of Monty Clift and John Ireland together. It sort of half pays off at the end of the film, but not as much as maybe I would have liked it to. I don't know what Hawks' proclivities were. I don't know whether... I think Clift must have been aware. John Ireland must have been aware. John Wayne probably wasn't. I don't think he would have approved based on what we know about his political affiliations, especially later in life. I don't think he would have liked my review or the review of other people online. But yeah, it adds something definitely, and kind of adds an element of fun to the film for me personally. Joanne Drew pops up late in the film. She's a very Hawksian actress in this. It's a very Hawksian female performance, very modern. I think one of the good things about the film is up to that point everybody feels of the era. She doesn't, but I don't think that necessarily is a bad thing. She reminded me of Rosalind Russell in Hawks' His Girl Friday. She is quick-witted, she's funny, you could argue a little bit out of place. I don't feel that way, but I could see how somebody could make that argument. I like her in the role. I like the part, but I could see how somebody could have issues with it, because it does sort of come from left field and does a little bit feel like she's a plot point to pull us to the third act. Again, mixed feelings on it. It's not something I would necessarily argue wholeheartedly, but I could see how somebody could make that argument. I loved the build-up to the third act. I loved the chase of Wayne slowly closing in on Monty Clift. You know eventually they will meet. You've seen films, you've seen westerns, you know there's no way he's not going to catch up with them. The bloodlust fan in me, the person who probably got into spaghetti westerns more than before they got into classic westerns, wanted there to be a fight. And more than just the fight we get, I wanted one of them to kill the other one. Ideally, Clift to kill Wayne. That felt like where the film was going. There is no Big Leone shootout. Obviously, this is 20 years before, a little bit less. But I couldn't help but feel a little bit like, while I didn't mind the ending we got, when it went down a comedy route, I couldn't help but think, was there not another ending that I would have preferred more? And again, this is probably sacrilege. It's probably people, big Western fans, jumping up and down, screaming at the screen, saying it's a masterpiece, it's the perfect ending. I don't mind the ending. It's comedic at a time when I didn't think the film was going to go back to comedy. That's not to say it's a laugh riot. It's not to say, it's farce or parody or anything like that. The ending works. It pays off on some stuff from the earlier scenes. It's not bad. I think Wayne and Clift play it well. So Joanne Drew drops a fantastic little monologue at the end, where she sort of loses patience with both men. I would have loved to have seen a more violent ending, but that probably says more about me than it says about Howard Hawks or the screenplay. I believe it was based on a real story, so again, maybe it wouldn't be ethical to end it with a bloodbath when that probably didn't happen in real life. But there's a scene where, at the end, where Wayne is walking towards Clift. Cattle are kind of dispersing either side. Wayne does not move off his line. He's just directly moving forward towards Clift, and it feels like a showdown. It feels like we're going to get that big moment, and then when we don't, I can see how people could be disappointed. I wasn't ultimately, because I think what they gave us was worthwhile, but there is part of me that would love to see a modern version, which is gayer and more bloody. Again, probably says more about me than it does anybody else. There's probably something to be said in the film about race, as there always is with Westerns. Anytime Native Americans are portrayed, I think there's probably always a conversation to be had around colonialism, around the history of America. I think there's probably something to be written by someone considerably smarter than me around the ethics of Wayne's character at the very beginning. Wayne's character obviously turns as the film goes on, but in pretty much the opening scene, or the opening scene or two, Wayne finds some land in Texas and just declares it his. He's challenged by I think a Mexican character who says the land belongs to him, or his kind of henchmen say the land belongs to him. That ends violently. Eventually Wayne seizes control. I think there is probably something to be written by someone smarter than me about how the film relates to the American dream and a white man's sense of entitlement to that. Wayne seems to decide he can have the ranch because he wants the ranch, and be damned anybody else who could have any claim to that land, particularly Native Americans. It's a Western, it's the 40s. I'm not one of these people who think, oh, well, we can never watch a film ever again because some of its portrayals aren't particularly favourable. I think it's important to look at these films and look at this sort of stuff. Hawks generally strikes me as kind of a more, at least compared to John Ford anyway, someone who's a bit more open-minded and maybe a little bit more aligned with the political views of today than Ford was. Again, that's probably a Pandora's box to be opened another day. But yeah, I think there is something there around why does the white man decide that this is his and now the Indians are the enemies? And I say Indians because that's how they're referred to in the film. If you're stealing somebody's land, then the film expect sympathy from us because the people who the land belong to have a problem with that. Again, it's a bigger issue. Probably not what Hawks was trying to get at, but again, it's hard to say. We don't know. Sadly, he's not here. It hasn't been for a while, so we can't ask Howard about his intention for the film. Overall, I thought it was a great film. I really enjoyed it. I do have my issues with it, but I think, as I said earlier, I think it's Wayne's best performance. I haven't seen enough of Monty Clift yet, but I will do now because I thought he was great. Same with Joanne Drew. Same with John Ireland too. He's only in a small part. I mentioned him earlier as Cherry Valance. He's excellent in a very, very small role. He's someone I would have liked to have seen more of in the film. So he's someone I will be looking into his filmography to try and find other films he did, especially Westerns. I love Westerns. I love Westerns of the 30s and 40s and 50s. And if he's going to crop up in more, then fantastic. I'll be watching those. But yeah, really enjoyable film. I would recommend it. Anyone who likes subtext, anyone who likes alternative readings of films, there's, it's a goldmine. There's so much there to listen to and examine and piece through. Anyone who likes Westerns, anyone who likes Wayne, he's at his best here. So yeah, full recommendation, Red River, Howard Hawks, 1948. Thanks.